This presentation was recorded at the 2015 Gold Coast ANZICS Safety and Quality Conference on Deteriorating Patients.
Thank you. How are we going? Lovely to be here. I'm glad you're all here at the coast. We put on good weather for you. Some of you did the marathon, I hope, over the weekend. Conflicts of interest. That's what we start with, straight up. My conflict of interest is I believe in rapid response teams. So I put that out there at the beginning. We called them initially in 1997 when we started ours at the old MARTA, secondary emergency response teams. We tried to develop this process that there were the primary emergency response teams, with the people on the ward, secondary emergency response teams, and then the tertiary emergency response teams, which were when you needed definitive surgery or other sort of activities. And if we'd had known about ECMO, we would have had quaternary emergency response teams. And that would have been QUIRT, and that would have been quite cool. I also believe that if you're not in ICU, I'm not sure why you're in hospital. And I think Ronaldo, in one of his lectures recently, or one of his editorials in the Medical Journal of Australia, commented that the composition of people who come to hospitals has now dramatically changed, not only for adults, but also for paediatrics. When I started, it would not be uncommon for someone to be admitted for a 2-week investigatory admission, and they would go to sleep at night and they would just be cute and cheerful. And we don't have that anymore. The nature of the people who come to our hospital are vastly different, and we haven't changed our systems. And I think I'd like to talk to you a little bit about that. But all of these things come together and culminate in the fact that I am, in actual fact, a member of the Church of the Latter-day Intensivists. I no longer believe that our system is adequate, that what we have in intensive care is what we should be bringing out to the rest of the medical community and our hospitals in particular. And I hope I can convince you of this in a few short minutes. As a good-going church, we need to have our apostolic part, and I believe that the rapid response teams are the apostolic division of this greater church. And any great church needs a vision of the apocalypse. And I've seen the apocalypse, and it is offensive, and it's all around deteriorating clinical capacity, and it's about ageing populations, and it's a terrifying thing. And there have been false prophets who've come to tell us that aeroplanes and motor vehicles can bring us salvation, and this is not true. In actual fact, what we need is intensive care. The Transformers, who are both automobiles and planes, and amazing machines of mass healing as well. And of course I'm talking about us as being the Optimus Prime. So I'm hoping that by the end of this you'll be convinced that rapid response teams are in actual fact an early response to a deteriorating medical system that we need to bring some of the intensive care flavour to our colleagues, and the learnings that we have from that are important. So I apologise. I don't need any of the numerology that we go on about. I believe these truths to be self-evident. I don't think that we need to develop further metrics. We just need to implement. Let's go back a little bit to why we have rapid response teams. Why do we have that? The theoretical process is quite easy. We've got a known patient. We've got a known diagnosis. The clever doctors make a diagnosis. They initiate a known treatment. It has a known recovery period. We have known outcomes. Lorenz Schlappbach, who worked with us at the Gold Coast, now back up at LCCH, has done a lot of work with some of our severe sepsis patients who deteriorate and looks at their genetic background. And in retrospect is able to demonstrate quite a significant number of patients have an underlying, unrecognised genetic abnormality which makes them susceptible to illness. We know that that's true. So we actually don't know our patients. They are an unknown quantity, and we treat them as if we understand them. So we do that at our own peril. We make a diagnosis, and we know how how much that deviates from their admission diagnosis to their discharge diagnosis when we fill out all our forms in ICU. We never hold a diagnosis in ICU to be true until they leave the hospital. And so the diagnosis, there are many ways, many impediments to making that true diagnosis. We don't know how patients respond to treatments. We certainly don't know what their recovery and what their unusual responses will be to those treatments, and we can't be guaranteed of the outcome. So we have a whole stack of unknowns, and we walk in with this theoretical basis which says that we have an understanding of all these things and that this is predictable, and it is not predictable. and yet we pop them into wards and let them pop off to sleep at night. I do remember one delightful clipboarder coming around asking why we kept the ventilators going at night in the NICU. Why couldn't we let the little children have a rest? I hold it as truth. I hold these things as true. So that's our theoretical basis. What pragmatic process do we have in place to ensure that even if we have a theoretical diversion, that we have a systems in place that will make us change? Well, we have a Department of Emergency which filters all of our patients within 4 hours. That is a designated time that they must move their patients on and out of their system. And of course they can do all of the important necessary assessments and predictions in that 4-hour time period. So they can either be discharged at their peril, they go to the short stay, and we've heard numerous stories about how short stays operate and work within our hospital systems, even in Australia. They can be sent to a ward where they will be eventually seen by someone who may come by before the handover and be reviewed by the most junior medical staff and further assessed. They may go to surgery and then to HDU or PICU or to the ward. They may go to the high dependency areas, or they may go to a PICU. I think the only ones who are safe are those who head to a PICU in most cases. But we don't allow that. And of course they're seen by the medical student, the intern, the registrar, the fellow, the consultant, an ascending, very, very hierarchical system. And the edicts come out from on high. And eventually the consultant who may not have seen the patient will pass on the judgment about this patient and what will happen. And then the therapies are initiated. But that group of people have already initiated a number of attempts at making a diagnosis. And of course there's a whole stack, a whole range of areas that we see, and all of us who are involved in RCAs are well aware of the cognitive areas that occur in making a simple diagnosis. And so once we deviate from the course at that very beginning of our path, what chance do we have of implementing a system that's going to provide adequate medical care when we don't have the correct pathway already assigned? So the treatment's initiated after a potentially flawed diagnosis is made, and it's delivered through the nurses through written documentation. Oftentimes the medical staff fail to even have a chat with the nurse. They're so busy running off. There's a potentially some form of documentation that goes on, and antibiotics. I didn't see the request. The antibiotics didn't get started for 6 hours. Common sort of things that we see. It's a very flawed system that we have. And then there's a hierarchical approach to the escalation of concerns. So I will admit to some studies here. Here we go. I did look at some studies, sorry. But I love this one because it demonstrates very clearly our ward nurse, our senior nurse, our intern, our registrar, our fellow, the consultant, and then a passage on to the ICU fellow for consideration for ICU care. So this was undertaken by Hansen et al. About 2007, looking at the reduction in cardiac arrests and duration of clinical instability after implementation of a paediatric rapid response system. So before the PRRS, how long did it take someone to get into ICU? And on average, it took them about 9 hours and 55 minutes, somewhere between 4 hours 50 and 18 hours 50 minutes, from the time of clinical deterioration, time that was recognised, time that it was transmitted up this hierarchical pathway, and to the PICU, and the patients moved their care to ICU. After the PRRS, unplanned admissions to PICU, nurse, intern, registrar, ICU, met call, and patient goes to ICU. Time to PICU about 4 hours 50, half. The time is halved to get the attention to the patient that is required. And we all know that 6 hours is a common time that we talk about, that there's oftentimes been clinical deterioration for 6 hours. So we've now stepped inside of that 6 hours and down to 4 hours and 15, but still up to 13 hours at times. If there's a PEDS MET activation, nurse, ICU, immediate activity. And again, the time has come down to 3 hours and 21, and somewhere between 47 minutes, 11 hours and 37 minutes. So still, they are not ideal, it's not perfect, but there's been a massive reduction in the amount of time required to get care to our patient just by bypassing this medical hierarchical system, which was quite good for Florence, but may not necessarily be so good for us in the 21st century, where with all the monitoring that we have available and all the systems that are potentially available to us, there should be an app for that. You know, all the monitoring that we do, there should be a simple app which has the iPad at the bedside, all the monitoring, you reach the criteria, the alarm goes off, someone flicks on your Skype or your FaceTime, you can see the patient straight away, that's seen up in ICU, someone in the ward has done something like this. It would take minutes, and yet we sit around, we have systems which take us this long. So the RRT is good, but maybe not yet as good as it could be, potentially when we think of all the issues and problems that we have within our system in managing our patients. So it's obvious that even that these systems are very good. And so just extending a little bit of Hansen's study, this is their, they documented before the METS or the PPRS was created. These are, again, another metric, mean patient days between cardiac arrests, yet another metric that we add in. But in this one, just thinking about having a MET team reduced the number of cardiac arrests. Just even thinking, not even having one, thinking about having a MET team reduced the number of cardiac arrests. And I think part of this was about how it activated or broke down the hierarchical escalation process. There was already consideration that we didn't need to wait this long. Hey, why are we waiting to do this? So even thinking about MET teams made a big difference and breaking down that hierarchical system. And I think that's part of the energy that goes into it. Very hard to measure. And that's why I'm not sure that we're ever going to be able to capture what we do and what difference that the MET team makes or the rapid response team makes. And again, after the MET team. So it's obvious that this is a significant benefit. Just thinking about a MET team is going to have an advantage. Why don't we have them in every single hospital? And of course, that's been the focus of a number of reviews and articles. And Brilli's team and a few of the others, and again, Roland's in Great Britain. Why? Who implements them? How have they been implemented? You know, 2006 IOM says, you know, these are the things that should be happening. We should be putting MET teams in. It's self-evident we should make sure that it all occurs. We started putting them in. So Roland in their study looked at what happened in Britain, and I think there's quite a similarity between the British systems and the Australian system, so I particularly like to focus on this one. And what they did was that they sent out a survey to all the hospitals who looked after paediatric patients in Britain, and that was the full-scale, full gamut, DGHs and the tertiary paediatric hospitals. And they got a response. They got 11 out of the DGHs, and they got 13 tertiary hospital responses who had MET teams in place. And that represented the fact that there were only 10% of the DGHs had a MET team or had a paediatric response team in place, a rapid response team, not an arrest as opposed to an arrest team. Whereas the tertiary hospital institutions had taken it up at about 56%. The tertiary hospitals thought it was a much better idea than the DGHs. And of course, probably some of that is explained by the people who are involved in it. How many intensive care consultants or registrars were involved in the DGH? None. They don't have a paediatric ICU in those centres, so they don't have that ability to respond. And yet we see a significant advantage here. And I think this is explained a little bit, and I think we've spoken about it a little bit, about the chalice of paediatric goodness that exists in our institutions or in our state. We have the chalice of paediatric goodness. And this starts with the patient being admitted. And they're admitted to a little place about 100 kilometres down the road from here, and the patient is assessed, and there's something wrong with them, so they're not sent home. There's a period of time which passes. They recognise that there's a deterioration. The local team is activated, which is the same person who admitted the patient. The nurse calls him back, calls the junior doctor back or the GP back to have a look at the child, and he rapidly recognises he's out of his depth. He has a chat to the local regional team, and he pops him in the back of an ambulance, plus or minus some monitoring. Again, cause for a number of root cause analyses that we've done. They take him down to the local hospital, which is now only 60 kilometres away from us, and the care is taken over. Still no one with a specific paediatric capacity or intention, and so the regional team recognise that they're out of their depth, and they call for the retrieval team. And this is about the first escalation of paediatric skills and capacities that are required for the management of this patient. Someone with acute care management skills, finally we get a retrieval team who arrives. The retrieval team transit the patient back to the large tertiary institution where they get their PICU admission. And then finally, we reach the pinnacle, the zenith of paediatric goodness and care, they're able to get onto the ECLS device for their bronchiolitis, which started way back here. So what do our MET teams offer? Probably in our hospital, in our tertiary institutions, where, surprisingly, all of our good data comes from, our good positive data about the response and capacities of our rapid response teams. Up here, the rapid response teams breaks down some of the communication barriers, moves people along at a faster rate, and provides that service. And I think Brad highlighted that in our regional centres, rapid response services are vastly different beasts and don't have the same implications and capacities that we talk about in our tertiary institutions. So I think that the ICU is, in actual fact, perhaps the model of care that we need to be offering our medical colleagues, that the service that's provided here, which is a non-hierarchical system, and by that I mean if you've ever suggested to a nurse that she can't escalate something in ICU, you'll very rapidly learn what a rapid response is. That we undertake an ICU treatment and diagnosis concurrently. We don't have a system which depends upon us making a diagnosis before the initiation of therapies. We have a very different model of care in the provision of acute care for children. We are non-hierarchical. We are consultative. We will ask everyone's opinion. We may not accept everyone's opinion, but we will ask it, both inside and outside. And I've seen a number of MET calls made because someone won't go and speak to a surgeon, where a gastroenterologist won't chat to a surgeon. And the major role of the RRT was to break down that level of communication. And we are outcomes-driven. We're not necessarily process-driven. We're driven by outcomes. So we have an entirely different model. And our RRTs pass out into the community of the heathen and spread the good news of intensive care to those who are yet uninitiated. So I think that RRTs represent an iterative process with the ultimate goal of altering the theoretical and physical processes of our current hospital medical systems. I don't think they are an endpoint. We shouldn't think of what we do here in these groups as an endpoint, but rather as a step towards a larger and greater improvement to our medical systems that we, at the intensive care, should be at the head of leading. And just to belie my biblical backgrounds, we see now only in an indistinct image in a mirror, but then we will see face to face. Now what I know is incomplete, but then I will know fully, even as I have been known fully. 1 Corinthians, better than that drippy one about what is love. This is an image of when we finally understand what our patients look like, when we finally have a capacity to make accurate and correct diagnoses, when we have a capacity to understand therapeutic options, our whole processes for RRTs will become obsolete. But at the moment they are an important role, and they continue to play a role of changing the medical model and practice in our communities, whether that be in the regional hospitals or in our major tertiary hospitals. So I'm hoping that the 5th Transformer movie, the second one was named The Revenge of the Fallen, which I think is salient in the context of our discussion about rapid response and medical emergencies. I'm hoping that perhaps the 5th one to be released next year will be The Age of Enlightenment. Thank you all.